Welcome. We're live here again with Coffee with Humans today with my new friend Chris. Chris, welcome to Coffee with Humans.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me.
Now, before the broadcast, you said that you were in France. Is that true?
That is true. I'm in the north of France.
The north of France. That's
Mhm.
that's amazing. So I'm in Northern Illinois. So for our listeners and viewers, we are on opposite sides, nearly
But,
opposite sides of the world. Not
but we
totally,
both
but
have access to good coffee.
we that's true. Your coffee might be better than mine. I don't know. I've never had
I,
coffee in France.
I'm from Detroit originally, and I've been to Chicago lots of times. So, yeah, I know you guys got good coffee,
Okay. All right. Well,
and we have good coffee. Maybe even the same stuff. I mean, from the same
that,
countries in the end. I mean, like Ecuador and all
well,
those
that's
places that
true.
make coffee.
That's true. I did a trivia one time. What was the trivia? Something like where something like I don't know. Coffee began in the Middle East, I guess. That's where it first started. It was just this little sliver of an area where coffee was first cultivated, which was an interesting trivia point for me because that's not where we get our coffee from now.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know that either, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. But you're right. We probably do get our coffee from essentially the same locations in the world. But that's yeah. I don't know. So what are you doing in France?
Oh man. So I got to France in a weird way, and it ended up being because of a girl. That's the root of the end
Okay.
of this. But it was
Girls.
totally an accident. I'd actually lived in France before. In 2002, I ran a small wine company out of France.
Oh, wow.
So and then I left France, going, I never want to go back to that country. And
Really?
then I'm back here again. But I'm in the north part. They have beer here, not wine.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I know
different.
little. I know very little about France. I've been to Italy. I've been to Albania. Um, but I've not been to France.
It's a great country to visit. The little known fact of where I am is that they love beer, French fries, and mussels, steamed mussels,
Oh,
and it's right by the Belgian border. And
okay.
they have, I mean, really, if you're a beer person, then the
Mhm.
north of France in this area is like one of the best places in the world.
So characterize why is it one of the best places in the world for beer? Is the beer different somehow?
So the variety is massive. People think Belgium has got really good beer. So Belgian beer is known to be
Mhm.
really good, but it's actually the Flanders area. And Belgium does has good beer, but the Flanders area, which is also extending into where I am, is that area that's really a beer place. So you just have every variety possible, and then it's like a big artisanal thing. So the variety is very good. You can have really dark, rich, but also sweet beers. I mean,
Okay.
it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And then of course they add mussels and good fries.
Which I would guess that mussels and fries along with beer is a pretty good combination. I mean,
It
I
really
know
is.
that fries are, but I've honestly never had mussels and beer.
It's really good. And they can even steam the mussels in beer. So you can have
Oh,
beer
see now
steamed
that's
mussels.
that sounds delicious.
Yeah. And they make their French fries different too. So we're used to kind of square fries, and they make them.
Okay.
It's not really like a half moon or quarter moon shape, but it's something like that. And it's pointy. So you get this like crisp edge on both sides, and then you get like a really soft, like meaty interior. So and you can scoop ketchup or mayonnaise here very easily with it because it kind of like has a spoon like characteristic to it. So
Oh
yeah,
wow.
they got good fries.
That sounds pretty intriguing. So the
It's not
coffee
what people think
scene,
of France about, right? I mean, you don't
no,
think
not at
Japanese or
all.
French, but
None of this rings of France. The stereotypical France, right? That we would expect. So what's the coffee scene like? How do you uh coffee shop, Starbucks? What's that like?
yeah. So we just got a Starbucks like 2 years ago, but we had a kind of a local Starbucks here. But then there's also like just independent coffee shops. And the coffee place I used to go to was run by, because now COVID, so they're closed, but he was run by the guy who actually got second place in the world in coffee tasting. He's number one in France. He got second in the world. He's actually a Belgium guy that lives in France. And he had a coffee place called Coffee Makers. He worked at the coffee place, and they used to they used to roast their own coffee beans, and they just make great coffee. So I'd go there every morning and have my coffee there. So that's
What do
a
you
good coffee chain.
what do you
Scene.
know about this coffee tasting thing? How do you get second place in the world? What is the competition of coffee tasting? Do you know
Yeah,
anything
I don't fully understand everything that they do. I just see them every day with these lines of little coffee cups, and they're like sipping them like wine, and then making notes about them. And
Wow.
but I guess it has to do with maybe something of the way that it's roasted or something. They have to pick the characteristics of the different coffees. And yeah, it's really weird. It's very much like wine tasting. When you watch wine tasters, coffee tasting, the process looks to me very similar, except they use a spoon instead of drinking out of a glass.
Oh, interesting. I see. This is good. I'm getting schooled on the world of coffee, which is super fun. It sounds to me it's like if you were to go order like a flight of beers, it's kind of like, well, they give these tasters a flight of coffees, and then I maybe identify, like you're talking about, the characteristics or maybe even the locations of where the beans came from or something like that. Is that
I don't know if they do the locations. I think so. I'm like, now I'm guessing because I've watched them do it and I've asked some questions. But they kind of they're brewing all these different things, and I don't know if it's like the type of roast and the roast times and the characteristics of the roast, if it's something like that. So yeah, I watched the competition, but it was all in French and I didn't understand half of it because, the guy I knew was in there. So it was like, I got to at least see.
right?
So, but yeah, it still baffles me, but they're also doing it different. Like I love cappuccinos. So I like to put milk in my coffee, which destroys the coffee for those guys. I mean, they're like putting it through filtered things and they're doing all the special things to really enjoy the coffee. And I'm like, well, put my milk in there, hot milk. So I guess they don't necessarily, they sell it to me. They're happy to sell it to me, but I destroy their coffee in the end. My cappuccino.
Well, I use the Italian mocha pot for most of my coffee. That's my morning go-to. I've got a 3-cupper, which is like 3 ounces. I mean, it's not right. It's like 3 espresso shots. But it is such a deep, dark, rich cup of coffee that when I go back to my pour over, which I also enjoy, or don't, it's crazy, but I found a percolator, like an old Corningware percolator from, I don't know, 70 somethings. And I use that once in a while because it can brew a deep, dark, rich cup of coffee as well. But that mocha pot just stands out. It's just there's a richness to the coffee, which is difficult to obtain in any other way.
Yeah. Italians know their coffee.
They do. And they know the coffee makes a difference for sure. I've tried a lot of different types of coffee in that mocha pot. And whether you're ordering like I do Cafe Bustelo, which is usually comes on a brick of coffee. That's a really super good one. Cafe Gavina, I've come to really like that. It's really it's high quality coffee at a reasonable price. And then there's Lavazza, which you gotta sell a kidney for in the
Do you want to hear something really bad? Do you want to hear something? Lavazza is the cheap stuff here.
Right. And no, I know.
Yeah,
Isn't that, it's terrible. Well, that's like the mocha pots because, you get a basic Italian mocha pot. You could buy them in Italy for, virtually nothing, the equivalent of like $5 or less.
Yeah.
And then you go to the States, right? And it's like $35 or, $50 for this mocha pot. You're like, what are you doing? People don't know. Just do your research and find a good pot, find a good coffee.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is you go to the US and you buy this stuff and it is European. I mean, Lavazza is, that's what, and a lot of people drink it. It's a popular thing and it's good. But then there's like just these other levels that Europeans partake in. And they're just unaffordable in the US. It's funny, it's relating to my time in the wine industry back in 2002. And I was working out of the southwest of France, and we'd go there and we'd buy a bottle of wine, and a bottle of wine cost us like €1.20. And that exact same wine in the US was almost $10. And it's like, it makes a big difference when you can buy it for €1.20 a bottle compared to $10 a bottle. And I started looking, I'm like, well, what about the ones that are like $10 for us? And I'm like, in the US, they're like $30. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's here. And for $30, I'm getting almost, I'm getting the second wine of a Grand Cru. In the US, you're at like 80. It's like, holy cow. Changes your meal. And the same with coffee.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, right. Totally. Yeah. So this is hearsay, but I since you used to work in the wine industry, I'll bring it up. I've got a friend who told me this story that they had some sommeliers who were sampling wine, testing wines, uh, and and they took white wines. They had a section of white wines, and they used red food coloring in all of them to make them look like reds, and none of whoever they gave this to found out, could tell that they were red wines versus white wines.
Do you want to hear another funny wine fact? Well,
Yes.
let me tell you two because I have some funny ones. So one of them is if you go and you check people that are like super tasters and super smellers, like people who have the most sensitive smell and taste, you'll find that the vast majority of them are women, but the vast majority of wine tasters are men. So you have to ask some questions here about what's going on. One thing. And the second thing is one of the things I learned in the southwest of France from really talking to the wine experts is if you ever asked, what's the best wine? Like, what's the best wine? The answer is whatever I like, because that's the only thing that
Right.
really matters. So people kind of go for the status stuff. But in the end, if you spend 80 euros on a bottle and you don't enjoy it, what the heck? That's a waste.
Totally.
Better to
It's
spend
so funny.
$10 and be happy.
It is so funny how easily people are swayed by marketing and things. I was at a tequila tasting recently, and I know very little about tequila, but they brought us from whatever it is to whatever it is, and the individual similarly was talking about how they've got all these grades and ratings and all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, whatever you like is whatever you like, and there's some very, very affordable tequilas, or very, 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 very affordable wines, or very affordable coffees that are, if that's what you like, then
Mhm.
that's awesome. There's zero reason to expect that it just because it's more expensive that it should be something. However, you'll respect this. So I've got a friend who was sent to this bottle for his birthday of wine, and I can't remember what kind of wine it was, but it arrived at his office. And so naturally the staff were like, a bottle of wine, that's, so they did some research on it, and they found it was $250 retail. And so, you'd expect it to be a pretty good bottle of wine. And so he invited me over to partake in this expensive bottle of wine. And I thought, well, we have to do a blind taste testing with something else. And so I I went to Target and found, like, I think it might have been a $5 or $6 bottle of Gato Negro, which who the hell knows what that is. Uh, and we put them head to head, and I mean, there's a difference. There's a difference between the $5 bottle of wine and the $250 bottle of wine.
Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah.
I think the one day that at the time I learned the biggest lesson, I was in the southwest of France, and there's this vineyard that produced some of the best Armagnac in the world, which is like a cognac, but from the south. Like, they're not really, but if you have a sense of what cognac is, that's an Armagnac, similar stuff
Okay.
made from grapes as a base. And this was like the guy who did this. It was his first independent running of the vineyard since he took it over from his grandfather. It was his first Armagnac batch from 1973, and it stayed in the bottle for like 30, or the barrels for 35 years. He didn't even like selling it. It was only sold to 2 restaurants in the world, both of them super famous. Maxime's in Paris, which is one of the most famous restaurants in the world, and one place in Annapolis in the US, and only because they were friends. It was almost impossible to get. So if I bought it and sold it on the open market, maybe I'd get it for like $1,000 or $1,500 a bottle. And I got a bottle for my mom because my mom really likes that stuff. And I gave it to her for a Christmas present. And the next weekend I said, hey, did you get a chance to taste it yet? And she goes, oh yeah, we drank it last weekend. It was really good. I'm like, what? You drank it in one weekend? She's like, no, one night. We had it in a night. We shared it in a night. I'm like, what? But she loved it. She enjoyed it. So, what do I have to say?
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Yeah, this expensive bottle, it was remarkable how complex the wine was. It was like the cheap bottle, you could drink it. It was like it would just kind of go down. There's no conversation with your, didn't stay on your palate, just gone. But this other bottle, it would like hit your palate, and then it would start unfolding, and it almost demanded. It was really weird, and it was a blind taste test, but it almost demanded this, just like pay attention for a moment,
Mhm.
and then it would subtly change. Oh my gosh, it was so great. So we've determined that we're gonna drink an absurdly expensive bottle of wine at least once a year, just cause.
It, it's fun. I mean, if you like that experience, it's great. It really is. I love it too. Now, if you come to Europe, you could probably get the same bottle for like,
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Yeah, the problem is you gotta amortize the plane ticket in there, so you gotta buy a lot of bottles.
Exactly. So it's still an expensive bottle, yeah. Or you got to drink a ton. Well, this is good. So when you first signed up, and I'm curious, what drew you to clicking the button to have coffee with me?
So I'd seen a couple of your podcasts, and I like that we're talking about this stuff. It can just be easy and fun, and we can just enjoy the time. It's really like if I'd kind of like met you walking to the coffee shop, I had some time, you wanted to sit down and have a chat. And I love that. I just love it. So it allows us to just chat and explore ideas and things and see where it goes.
So you have some ideas that are on your mind. And when I was asking you, what are we going to title this chat? We were stirring around thinking, what to talk about. And you had some heavy, I don't know if they're heavy concepts, but they're at least like level 2 thought concepts, things that most people wouldn't consider. And we boiled it all down to the roots of knowing yourself. But you're talking about stoicism, which I've only talked to one other person about in 150 something episodes. And I know a little bit about it. I have a book called The Daily Stoic, and I've read some stuff.
Good book.
And then you're also getting into neuroscience and quantum mechanics, which I've touched a little bit on those just out of curiosity in my 40 something years on the planet. How does all of this tie together, and why do you care?
Oh, well, that's a big question. Oh,
it is. I know it's very open-ended.
Yeah. Oh,
but there's got to be some reason why all of these disparate things like have circled around, and like suddenly you're interested in them.
So I had a really weird childhood, and so I became a mechanical engineer. I'm a graduate of University of Michigan, all that good stuff. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be a priest. And the question that has to come up is, what in the heck did a kid who want to be a kid who wants to be a priest is already weird. Everyone wants to be like firemen and stuff. And then like, how did you go from a priest to an engineer? And the reality was that it was a one needing to prove my dad wrong. And after I got done, I traveled abroad. And my first job, I got super lucky, and I ended up in Italy as my very first job. I was sent overseas to Italy, and like everything was flipped on its head. I never expected to even go out of the country in my life. I always expected to kind of stay in Michigan and work somehow there. And I ended up moving to Italy, and everything was flipped on its head. All my expectations, all of the things in my life that you would expect to be normal, all became like absurd. And I'm like, holy cow, why have I lived the way that I've been living for this 22 years on this planet? And I started having to I got curious, and I started breaking them down and just realizing all of the reasons I was doing things that were fighting against other people or going for something that I was told was good. And I'm like, there's something like, I don't have any freedom this way. I'm just either going for something that other people said, or I'm going against something that other people said. And this is weird. So I started looking at how I could kind of figure my own way in life and be sure I wasn't going to regret stuff when I died. It's kind of weird, but the priest thing made it so that when I was 22, I was actually thinking about that. Wow. So I set out on a journey when I was 22 to figure that out. And I'd come a long way on my own, but in 2010, I was living in China, and I decided I wanted to get an MBA. And everybody told me, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, everybody told me MBAs are worthless, because I already run some companies, and they're like, don't get an MBA. So one of my friends said, hey, there's this crazy MBA in Italy by the University of Iowa, and they do this neuro leadership thing. So you'll actually get leadership stuff, and that might have value because the MBA stuff won't. And I'm like, okay, well, why not? So I went there, and they had a crazy MBA program. They hooked us up to biometric devices, and we got into neuroscience and got to meet all these cool professors. And at the end of it was a great year, by the way. I mean, they locked us in a monastery for a year with like 18 other kids, 18 other people. And then they like pressure cooker, 2 years worth of classes put into 1 year, really super pressure. And then you're getting feedback. It was really a cool program.
Wow.
Through the University of Iowa in Chimba. And at the end of the program, I'd written the director like a 12-page letter of all the things he needed to change to make it better. And he goes, good, why don't you come here and you can help? I'm like, okay. So for like 5 years, I just got stuck into all this science. But I was still looking at what's missing. Like what there's a bunch of things that we're missing. Because in the program, what we were doing is we were helping people distinguish between like, this is what your brain is going to tell you. So, all the neuroscience and that stuff. So for example, if let's just take running, like you decide you want to go exercise and you're going to run a marathon because you decide this is one of your goals in life. Well, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to wake up in the morning and go, oh, I got to run. I shouldn't have to do this. And then you're going to be running and be like, my legs hurt. Maybe I should stop. Like your brain just talks you into all kinds of stuff. So, that's just an example, but that happens everywhere. So they taught us kind of, this is the way your brain gets in the way, but then you still have to come up with some foundation. So it's like, okay, well, that's still my brain telling me what I should or shouldn't do. How do I decide how do I decide where to go? Like if it's not my brain telling me stuff and leading me around, what even makes me get out of bed in the morning? And so that's when I started continuing to dig. And then, I got into all this other stuff. So it all comes together as a way of my journey to figure out who am I in the end and how do I separate who I am from all the rest of this stuff, right? All of my brain, all of what other people want, society's pressures and all of that. And I found a lot of really neat things in that journey and that discovery.
Well, if you're going to be a priest at a young age, you grew up in a pretty defined boundaries, and you knew what you were heading for. And then if you traveled around the world, it seems to me, you're like, oh my God, this is like the world is a big place. And there are people who live perfectly normal lives on the other side of the world who have known nothing about my life and nothing about my experiences. And they think their lives are, defined and headed to a particular place. And that must have been very eye-opening.
Well, so the crazy thing about my religious thing is neither of my parents are very religious at all.
So why did you want to be a priest?
Exactly. I literally was like, it seems like the randomest thing to choose when you're like 5 years old. But I would go to church on the weekends with my grandparents. My parents didn't even go to church. And yeah, I guess I was like, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't remember back to that time what was driving me, but I just had this inclination. And, being a teenager also changed some of those inclinations too. But,
for sure,
discovering girls and all that. But, yeah, I have no idea. That's what I want to do. And I don't want to be a priest now for sure. But an engineer was really a different direction compared to that. And I'd realized that was due to my relationship with my dad and wanting to prove him that I could do it, what he said I couldn't.
Yeah.
So
you must have something in you must want to see a bigger picture and explain meaning and then find reason for that meaning, or like that didn't sound quite right, but right. If all of this stuff, then why? And there must be a reason for all of that must be bigger than just the fact that there's stuff.
Right. And actually, after all the time, what I found is that you can't answer the question. And now we're getting really deep. But I found that you have to answer the question for yourself.
Okay.
And that's the best you can do. Well, let me go like take a step back and kind of talk about like how I just did it, really the quick way of going about it. So I'd realized for me as well, I need to have something, like I need to have a good job so I can do stuff. So like I can be a dad or whatever. So I can be somebody, like be a good dad or be a good parent or be a good provider or, till it show love, right? Any of that stuff. But I had to have in order to do, in order to be, which is the traditional project management, set your goal and go for it type thing. So you can have the end result. And what I came to the conclusion of is that the other way to do it is to say, I'm going to be who I'm going to be. And I'm going to decide that myself. And then I'm going to do whatever there is that comes from that. And then I'm going to have a result. And that instead was the profound thing. And then you say, okay, well, who are you? Like, what does it mean to be? And that was the exploration that got me into the neuroscience. You start taking away, if I take away all my brain's kind of automatic talk, and I take away all my wants, and I take away all the other stuff, what am I left with? And actually, Viktor Frankl touched on this in the book Man's Search for Meaning, when he talks about the concentration camps. And there's the famous story where there's the people who would break into the hospital and steal food from the sick and the dying because food was life. But there was some people that would go into the hospital in order to give their food to the sick and dying, which doesn't make logical sense. And he attributed it to people choosing to be who they were going to be despite the situation. They weren't going to allow the situation to dictate who they were. That's their freedom. That was the last of the human freedoms. And so a lot of the ideas that I have with starting with be come from those types of things. And Stoicism actually seems to miss that a little bit. It goes through all the other stuff, but it kind of misses that one piece, is where do you start? And they kind of have virtues there, but I still haven't figured out how they see virtues in a way that are unmovable. Because there's some famous Stoics that made a lot of mistakes. So,
well, sure. Here's my thought. I don't know, connecting some dots. So I actually watched a show on the Holocaust this past week. So it's interesting you bring up Viktor Frankl, and there was an issue with the trials, and how Germany didn't want to have trials. They didn't have actually laws in place at the time to punish en masse people who did not have a particular crime that they could point to. Like, we didn't see you, actually murder a particular individual, so there's no crime that we could, tag you on to then bring you to trial. Well, anyhow, through a handful of events, eventually they bring they call him the accountant to trial, and it's a Netflix documentary. You can freely watch it. And basically, this guy, his task was to simply collect all the stuff from the people as they came into the concentration camps, because they didn't need the stuff anymore, was his explanation. And during his trial, they brought in other Holocaust survivors to speak about what had happened. And in the middle of all of this trial, there's one lady who says, "I've forgiven this guy, and I've forgiven all of the people who committed these atrocities." And then there are a bunch of other people who are saying, "We can never forgive them." And then there's somebody else who says, if she needs forgiveness for herself to live her life, that's fine. Here's how I've dealt with living my life. And it seems to be another one of those cases where what's the right, what's the virtuous, what's the logical, what's the commonsensical way through this? There's no particular path that you could point to and say one is best or one is not. And in fact, there might be the moral path, there might be the law path. So should he be brought to trial? For law, probably. Morally, I don't know. Yeah, maybe, yes. Was he a victim in this situation? Like, there's all of these layers of questions that people have, and yet at the end of the day, you just got to make a choice. And of all the people who came to his trial to offer their testimonies, they all dealt with it completely different ways, and they all feel perfectly justified in their experiences. The level deeper, regardless of how everybody act, the level deeper is pretty universally, people would look at what had happened and said, that is a terrible atrocity for all sorts of reasons. And we'd all agree. We all have some fundamental agreement, even though we might even offer forgiveness in a completely different way, or maybe not. Maybe we wouldn't offer forgiveness at all.
No, it's super interesting as a case, because if you think, as a society, we do make a lot of rules, as we have to, because that's just what works. And we don't always get them right, but we do the best we can do. And we're all looking for kind of the right way But all we can really do is listen to other people give us advice. I mean, in general. And those people were just giving advice based on what they worked through. And then we're taking it and we're listening to it. We're going, hey, that sounds good. But in the end, it's still our life. I mean, it doesn't matter who you're looking up to. Like, I could live my whole life and at the end of it go, well, I followed everything Gandhi said I should do and I'm not happy. Oh my gosh. Well, I just wasted my life on what another person says. And he can be brilliant. He can anything, anybody, these philosophers or these religious leaders, they can be brilliant. But no matter what, it's still our life. And we still have to take responsibility for it because we only get one. And just the question I had was, how can we take responsibility for it as fully as possible? And maybe we want to listen to other people, but maybe we also want to do something different. We want to test our own way and we want to see for ourselves. And kind of with the being part, the goal is to find a way to explore based on who you choose from you because you said so. And then you go forward and then you explore and you see what's there. And for me, and I assign all my emails, stay awesome and enjoy your life's journey, because it's your journey. And if you believe in reincarnation, great. But you don't know that for sure. You don't, like, maybe there's a heaven, maybe not. You can't be absolutely sure. You can only believe it. So what we can be sure of is you got this life, you got this journey. And if you just focus on making it all you can make it be, then that's probably the best you can do. And why not just do it in a way that you can take both the credit and the blame for the outcomes? So that's the exploration.
Well, that's interesting to bring up the idea of the credit and the blame for the outcomes, because I think therein lies a bit of the rub, because it's my opinion that most people believe something at some point in time that flies in the face of facts. The example that was given to me at one point in time was that there's a guy standing on stage and there's like 1,000 of us in the audience. He says, how many people believe that the early bird gets the worm? And everybody's like, yay, right. And then he says, how many believe that good things come to those who wait? And we're all like, well, yeah, wait, huh? And and we can carry at times as people competing beliefs. Is it the early bird gets the worm? Is it good things come to those who wait? And the answer is, well, it depends. And yet, when it comes to like personal issues of personal identity, we want to end up with more answers, it seems, than questions, right? And every pretty universally, the goal, I think, of most belief paradigms is to provide answers that then people just believe, rather than posing questions and offering discovery.
Yep. No, I agree.
So what then, how does a person transition to that concept of asking questions? It seemed like you asked questions when you went from, hey, I should be a priest, into I'm going to be a mechanical engineer, into I'm going to go lock myself in a monastery for a year and learn about leadership. And and now you're here talking about stoicism and all sorts of stuff. You had a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I started out with questions, and I got lucky because the world is this amazing teacher, because you can have an idea, and once you bump your head up against it a couple times, it teaches you, that school of hard knocks. And actually, in the Alignment Quotient book that I wrote, and that some of that's what we're talking about now. The way that I have people declare being is I've actually defined 35 words, and they're abstract concepts meant in noun form. So, like for me, love, for example, the word love, you can be love. It's something you choose and you just declare, this is what I'm going to be. And the definition is to be a stand for the life of another, so that they have the experience of peace, love, and joy in the world. So now, as soon as you say, okay, and part of the process is, this is who I am. Now, from that, you do whatever there is to do. And then automatically you start saying all these things get in your way. It's like, if you like, spin yourself around, close your eyes, blindfold yourself, and then say, okay, I'm going to go that way. And you point in this direction, and then you just start walking. You just find all these things in your way that you just didn't know, because you chose you're going to go in that direction straight. And through that process, using being, you're discovering yourself. You're discovering all the thoughts and ideas and the way your body works, the way your mind works, and the way your relationships are structured. You're learning all of these things because you're bumping up against the problems. And the problems are only created because you've made this declaration of being, and now you're living into it. So you unavoidably discover, and through that, the part of asking questions becomes a bit more easy.
How then do you decide how then do you decide, or do you answer this question in the book, who you should be, or what you should be, or how you should be?
So, and actually I have an online course too. So I actually have a worksheet to walk through, and there's two ways you can go through the worksheet, and they're done intentionally. One is for the person who needs structure. So I ask you a series of questions like who are your role models? Like, what do you appreciate about these people? And have you distill them down into who they are. And then I have you look at like the feedback you have, what you want people to say about in your deathbed. And I have, the people who love you and the people who'd be your rational critic. And I have you kind of distill down to, you can come to some list so that you can choose. That's one way. The other way is I actually have a list in the back. You can cut them out. You can fold them up, put them in a hat, and randomly pick them out. So there's two processes you can go to get to that, to start practicing. And I do it that way just because some people would find it bizarre just to always pull it out of the hat. But I'm surprised about a third of the people that go through just decide to pull it out of a hat. They just want to explore. And I think that's a fun way to do it. But either way, it doesn't matter, because people put a lot of thought and everything into it, and they get there and they're like really confident. And then they go forward and they realize they find all the same questions come up and all the same problems. So that's how I have them do it. And then through the core class, they actually explore. And then I give some frameworks based on neuroscience and social psychology to help them put things in boxes about themselves in an easier way. So it's not like you have a million things that it could be. It's like, oh, here's 5 that you probably want to look at. And here's like another 10. And if you look at these 15 things, you're going to find most of what you're doing lies inside of them. And it's easier to put them in boxes and go, oh yeah, that's not me. That's my brain. It's like, okay, well, now I understand what my brain's doing. And now I can listen to it or not. I still have a choice, but at least I know.
So there's a recognition. It seems that there's a recognition that the individual is existent within a body that has a brain, and the brain and the individual are not the same thing necessarily. And there's a will, right? So back to your you used an example earlier on about a guy, wakes up in the morning and think I should go running, and then doesn't. And then you alluded to, you're like, and your brain gets in the way. Your brain does things, and knowing what your brain does. How does all that relate to that very practical example of that guy who wakes up in the morning and says, I should go running, and then doesn't?
Yeah, so your body and your brain. So, well, go ahead and separate yourself from your brain and see how that goes. Right? It's impossible to do. At the same point, we don't really fully understand consciousness. Like, we don't know. Right. And we do have this ancient idea of spirit or soul, and we do have some very interesting evidence if you look on from the United States, surprisingly.
I recently watched a show on that too.
Yeah.
Of all sorts of evidence of consciousness outside of the body.
Right. And reincarnation, actually, which is really bizarre, because as a Christian culture, we don't have this concept like they would have maybe in like Nepal or someplace else. Mm-hmm. So the fact this is, and these are not woo-woo people. These are scientists documenting cases, which is fascinating. And we don't have a lot of them, but there's some that are just raise some eyebrows.
Yeah.
So we don't know this. So we are connected to our brain, and nobody's going to be able to tell you anything differently. And we don't know what that means. So that person who wakes up in the morning and is going to go running, what might be happening is their brain's going, man, this feels so good. Why lose this great morning to go for a run when like it's so warm and nice inside this bed, and I can just get a couple more hours of sleep. Like, you can convince yourself of anything. And your brain is going to want to do that, because that's what your brain's there for. Your brain's there to keep you alive. And alive sometimes looks like just enjoying the fun, right? Because why not, right? From our brain's perspective, there's no reason to run unless that there's a lion chasing after you. So why force it? And to understand that our brain is set that way for energy. If you talk to scientists, they'll say it's energy conservation. Your brain wants to conserve energy. So running does not conserve energy. Thinking does not conserve energy. We want to go to the lowest state of energy use. So that's what our brain does. And then if it's forced out, then it will.
And
because
every
it's kind of,
psychologist would say that there's actually some other reason why a person, doesn't get fit when they wanted to be fit,
Mhm.
and why they put on weight to keep other people at a distance. And, and then scientists will tell you, well, actually there's chemicals at play in here too, that you get into this cycle. Your body wants those chemicals, and that's why you overeat.
Mhm.
And then somebody will say, no, that's not what it is. It's interesting that what's fascinating to me is, in like discussions like this, the only the only the only way is to continue through the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
and the rabbit hole just gets deeper and more connected, and 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 in some ways more confusing, or at least more questions are created than answers are ever found. And as soon as we find an answer, then that creates actually another question, or when we find an answer, that answer is tested, and then it becomes even more that it's like, oh, but that wasn't what it was, there's actually something else. It's like an endless world of discovery to figure out why a person doesn't get up in the morning to just go go,
Go running.
go running.
Well, it's
you know
interesting that there's some really interesting science that's gone on that's found some really interesting connections in mathematics that suggest that the brain wants to achieve the lowest state of energy. And they have some very, very interesting proof that this is the case. And one of the cool things about it is, like, let's take your example of, like, gaining weight in order to, like, avoid having to get close to people. Well, if getting close to people causes you a lot of anxiety, causes you a lot of burning energy, then gaining weight is the way to minimize that energy output in that sense. So they've been able to really frame a lot of our behaviors in a lot of different ways to this concept of minimizing energy use. So if there's anything, like, could be that running causes you anxiety, or anything that would cause you a lot of stress and anxiety would make your brain need to work more to solve the problem that it sees as this disconnect. And if it has to solve the problem, then it's going to do the thing that causes that problem to be solved in the easiest way. So but you're right. You can, if you ask the individual questions, the rabbit hole can go on for a very long time. And this science is not, it's not finished. Like, there's still massive debates going on. There's a lot of different theories going forward, and we don't know in the end what's the outcome's going to be. We just know they've been arguing about consciousness for a really long time, and they haven't gone anyplace.
Right. Yeah. So here's an interesting question. So you talked about quantum mechanics, and I'm curious, and in all of your research and studies that you've done or been part of, and clearly read, this idea of people's consciousness and our will affecting things around us. So affecting things like random number generation, which has been tested and proven that we as people can actually affect systems around us that we have no direct control over. Where have you done anything in that,
Yeah, I mean,
or
so
read anything about that?
the science on this is so fascinating. There's so many gaps right now, but you're in a very interesting place, because I've seen some of this stuff, and there's actually a number of different studies, not only just random number generators changing, but there's some other things as well. And keep in mind that for the science part, you not only need to have a number of different evidences that this happens, so a number of different independent things, but you also have to link it to something else. And I haven't seen all the linkages put in place, which is a big missing. That being said, one of the reasons I dug into quantum physics is there's some really interesting science there on entanglement that we haven't really explored all of the places this extends to. So, like, for example, probably everybody is familiar with the Copenhagen interpretation of the double slit experiment, because it's like everywhere. It talks about, particles going through these two slits, and you'd expect they'd go through one or the other, and it ends up they go through both, and they interfere with themselves, and they create an interference pattern instead of the two slit pattern like you'd expect if you were shooting a gun at a paper with two slits in it. And so this is a very weird experiment itself. But what scientists did with that is they created entangled photons, and they shot one at the double slit. And then after the one had hit, they went down and it went to either a quantum kind of system to measure, and it either measured it or not. And if it had measured, and when I say it didn't measure it, I mean, it kind of like just measured it, but destroyed it, so that it was still interacted with, which is kind of important. And what they found is if in the future that entangled particle had been measured, then the previous particle had already hit the slit as if it was a little dot. But if it hadn't been, then it hit it as a potential wave. So it had interfered with itself and hit in the interference style, which makes zero sense because it's basically something that was going to happen in the future impacted the past. And we know entanglement is a thing. We know it exists. We know particles can be entangled, and we have no idea on a mass scale, for us, how we're entangled with things. Like, are we entangled with other things in the same way? We just have no clue. Yeah. And so that's a big gap. And so when you ask me this question about those random number generator things, it's like, okay, where is the entanglement? And that was one of the questions that the Copenhagen experiment kind of started asking is maybe the observer was entangled with the particle, which is why that happened somehow. And so when you were observing it, there was some sort of entanglement that was collapsing the wave or not. But we just don't know. There's just so many gaps there in our knowledge and understanding, but there's some really cool science there that allows us to think about some really neat things that could change the way we look at our lives and determinism. And for me, that's a big thing, is looking at, is determinism a real thing? Like, we don't have any real choice.
Define determinism for our viewers and listeners.
So determinism is when basically from the beginning of time, everything was kind of like dominoes falling down. And so what's going to happen next was already determined by all of the different things in the past, whether you could have known them or not. So functionally, it kind of eliminates the concept of free will. Like, what's the next domino that's going to fall can't fall any other way because of all the things that had happened before that predetermined that was going to be what would happen next. And I don't like it because it means that we have no free will. And it's kind of one of my belief things. So, but there's also evidence to suggest that maybe this isn't the way that it works. And some of that lies in the fact of, the whole idea of probability waves, like with particles, even they're not a thing until you observe them. And otherwise they're just a potential of things, which is kind of how we experience life.
Right. I heard an interesting explanation on this. That the closer you get to an event, the more determined it is. So for instance, if you said, I'm going to lower my arm, I'm going to lower my arm. I look like I'm floating. I wear this black.
It's like one of those really cool things.
Like a mime.
Like a black light. Yeah.
Okay. So if I say I'm going to lower my arm, I have free will to lower my arm until I lower my arm, and then my arm is just lowering. And now I have free will to stop it. But once it's started, I no longer have the free will because it's just happening. And so the explanation was, the closer you get to an event, the more determined that event becomes, and the less free will you have, which is an interesting theory.
I like to say it the other way. The closer you get to something in time, the less possibilities are in front of you.
There you go.
And the reason I like it that way is in one way you're saying, look, my free will is limited, and the other, you still have possibilities. It's just the possibilities start reducing, and that's a normal thing. So I don't have a problem with that. But there's still possibilities, and that's critical to free will, because as long as you have possibilities for that next second, and it's not only one, but there's multiple things, even if there's 2 or 3 or 4 only, it still gives you choice.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Well, this all circles back on Coffee with Humans, because Coffee with Humans, this actually does. It wasn't just a cute transition. It circles back into Coffee with Humans because I, as part of my belief system, I do believe that humans carry a special power and authority and responsibility for the world that nothing else gets. Everything else just kind of goes about its business. And if its environment is destroyed, it's done. If it no longer has something, the thing it used to eat, it's done. Mm-hmm. Humans, however, affect our environment in ways that nothing else affects its environment, and we affect each other in ways that nothing else affects. And so I think, and why Coffee with Humans partly exists, is this idea that when you get 2 people into a space, we really have the capability to do a handful of things. Number one is to name our present reality and name a different future that we'd like to see. Mm-hmm. Nothing else does that. It just does its thing. Mm-hmm. Then we get to go about the business of creating putting things in place, things that didn't once exist, and causing them to come into existence and creating that future.
Mhm.
And then we also have the opportunity to destroy things, either out of ignorance, stupidity, or malice, or destroy things for our good because they no longer serve us to get to that reality, that future reality that we want. And that's why Coffee with Humans exists, is to provide that space where people get to name, create, and destroy things just because we as people have that ability to do it.
I love it. By the way, you'd love in the book, I have a chapter called Future First, and that's like
Okay,
almost exactly the concept of it.
that's
It's that
awesome.
you actually have the chance to create your, so we have a future comes first and then we live into that future, and the only reason that future exists is because we said so. So
Right?
we spoke our word, right? And that's why.
Yeah.
And
I
a
think
lot
it
of times,
all. Go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. I would say a lot of times we just go ahead and we just kind of like fall into our future, but we don't have to. We can, but we don't have to. We can do something different, which
Yeah,
is
absolutely. And
exactly.
I think it's actually the intersection. And I've got to pick up your book and read it now. Or actually, I'll probably listen to it. Is it on Audible? I hope it's on Audible.
It isn't. The course, it's like the course
Son of a
actually.
gun. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
I'll read it.
Uh,
Is it super long? Why am I
It's
qualifying all
actually
this?
it's actually a work. There's a workbooks built in there, so all the things I'm telling that I teach in the course are
Okay,
in there. So you can go
good,
through, and then you have the workbook, and yeah. So you can fill it
good.
out
I
and
love it.
everything.
So I think that the confluence of all these things you're talking about, because the idea of our physical world, and we interact with our physical world, we can study our physical world, we can feel, touch it, know it, and we can come to new conclusions and know those things, and determine as many things as we can, and understand as many things as we can, and leave open all the things we can't, or the things we once thought we knew that now we didn't. We turns out we don't. um, that I think it is linked, or is necessarily linked with, you have some spiritual background, and some, some framework for, the spirit, and then we've got this idea of, the consciousness that sits in there. Where is that exactly, and how does that interact with all of these things? Because it's pretty clear it interacts in ways that we don't understand. We can measure them even, but who can say how? It is interesting that all of that has come together now in your journey.
Mhm.
Even from a young age, that you you wanted to answer life's biggest questions for people.
And kind of a weird thing on that consciousness thing and measurements, because some people say, yeah, but we can put things in the brain and we can see what's going on. And
Hmm.
what we see is we see blood flow or electrical activity. And this is just a fun thing, because this is not me. There's somebody else. There's another scientist who's really, really brilliant who said this. So I'm just going to like make it up, tell you what he said.
Okay.
And he said, when we're looking at brain stuff and we want to say the brain causes something, he goes, well, imagine if an alien came down to Earth and it was watching like a bus station or a train station. What it would see, it would see a whole bunch of people kind of coming together on the platform, and then it would see a train arrive. And from that information, it could assume that people arriving on a platform caused train. But there was actually something behind that. There was a schedule that was unseen that caused all of those things to happen. And the aliens didn't have a way to know about that schedule and that timing plan and all that other stuff. But with the information they had, they made the best assumption of causality that they could. And we would know that they were wrong, but they wouldn't know they were wrong. And so they're saying we're so young on the brain stuff that we don't know that that's what's happening, that we're
Yeah,
measuring stuff that we think is causal, and it may not be causal. We just don't know.
that kind of stuff is super fascinating. There's a whole world in that. I read a study, um, well, a synopsis of a study that was done many years ago, back to this, that it was also kind of like this idea, like, I'm going to move my arm out, and they were measuring electrical activity, and they had come they it was when they had the resolution or the ability to measure the speed of electrical activity much more finitely, and what they measured was when a person consciously made a decision to move their arm, they had subconsciously made the decision moments before,
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly. And so
Mm-hmm.
you'd say, I'm going to move my arm, but your body already started the process. And then it went, bloop, and then you're like, oh, I'm moving my arm. And it's so fascinating, when we loop all that stuff back on there. It's like, did I why do I do dumb things? It's like, there might be more to it than you realize. You might be realizing after the fact. Your brain might be processing it after the fact, and you're coming to the conclusion, but the reason started somewhere else that we don't know. We don't know where it was at.
Well, actually, so in the book, that's like one of the key things. It's that you can actually build your brain. So you can mold and modify your brain. And there's tons of research that shows neuroplasticity and how it works, and you can rewire your brain. And so part of the whole reason of starting with being is so that as you go forward and you start exploring and it kind of forces you to ask the questions about yourself, you can rewire your brain. So your brain is subconsciously doing what you would already plan to do. But it's just like running. If you get up in the morning every morning and you go running at 7 a.m, then your brain getting up in the morning becomes easier because your brain just knows that's what you're going to do next. So the arm movement is an example, but most of the things we do are done non-consciously. But you can train your brain to habitually non-consciously do that, which I call supporting yourself. You actually create your brain as a tool to support you and where you want to go in your life. And so that's kind of the point of starting with being.
Which is so important. And maybe you get to this in your book, this idea that we are basically built on habits throughout our day. And there are so many things, so many decisions that our brain made for us that we never gave conscious thought to. And it became programmed that way. We at one point in time made a conscious decision, or sometimes a subconscious decision, to program our brains to do that thing. And then when we want to change it, we wonder why it's so difficult. And we go and we ascribe all sorts of reasons, but part of the reason could be just you had programmed a different habit, and your brain is there to support you in whatever it seems that you felt like you wanted to do. Your body's just going along for the ride to some degree. So put a new habit in place, your body will catch up. And I think that I've never heard anybody who's become, let's say, successful in whatever they wanted to do. Like I saw recently somebody who had become an Olympic athlete in 2 years.
Wow.
And she had just decided, like, I'm just going to start doing this. And she made it to the Olympic team within 2 years. And she had never done that sport prior. It just wasn't something that she had done. And she just quote unquote, put her mind to it and started putting the disciplines in place and worked her ass off, and voila, she's there. So the idea that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It's to some degree, it is that simple. And there are all sorts of other complications, right? But it does begin, I think, with what do you intend to do, and then start putting those disciplines in place, and your body will support you
over time. There's some really interesting neuroscience about the amygdala, and there's actually some parts of your brain that, as you use them more, they get bigger, and the amygdala is one of those areas. So that's, people know about that. It's kind of like the fight and flight. But you can actually reduce the size of some of those parts, those structures in your brain, and reduce their connectivity. You're able to do it yourself with practice and exercise, and mindfulness is shown to do that. So focused mindfulness practice has shown to be able to reduce some of these things that can get in our way. And I talk about that a little bit in the book, but the science is very, very, very good on that. And it doesn't take a lot. It's like 12 weeks of 15 minutes a day, something like that. And you can reduce the size of your amygdala, which reduces the amount of stress and anxiety you have in your life. And you can see both of those things happening. You can see the size and the connectedness of those brain parts reducing at the same time that you experience the anxiety and the other things reducing as well in patients.
It's fascinating.
I think that is fascinating, because it's really showing that with some focused attention and effort, you can change actually the way your brain talks to you, which is
one simple change I made a long time ago. And because I was coaching at a gym, and I noticed that people would go, trying to get them to lift weights that they had not lifted before. And the typical response you get is, I can't do whatever it is, insert phrase here. And I suggested, having seen many people actually having already lifted the weight, that they absolutely had lifted the weight already. And so it was absurd. It's actually quite literally absurd to say you can't, because you already did. What you couldn't do is you couldn't land the weight. You couldn't hold the weight after you had lifted it. Those are two different things. And I suggested that when when we go to begin lifting a weight off the floor to maybe hold it over our head, imagine the number of decisions that your body has to make to get everything working in perfect synchronicity to get yourself up there, so that there's not one part that's not, out of place, because your body doesn't want to fall over and it doesn't want to hit its head. That, like, hands down, you'd have to work really hard to get yourself to fall over or to hit its head. And so everything from the point that you thought about, I'm going to lift this weight, if you're not used to it, if you haven't done it before, your body's just like trying to figure out ways. It's looking ahead in all of these series of events and going, no, you're not. And so he's like, you lifted the weight, and then you're like, oh, I can't do this. It's like, you did it. And so what I started to train people to do was just change the phrase. Say, I haven't yet, or I don't know yet. And that is, I think for me, it's been so applicable to so many things. Instead of seeing roadblocks, instead of seeing can'ts, or instead of seeing maybe some levels of anxiety there because I don't know what's on, like if I open the door, oh my God, all hell breaks loose. Instead say, I don't know what that's like. I've not experienced that yet. Or I don't yet know how to insert phrase, because I think it opens it, for me at least, and for people I trained, it opens the mind immediately into this area of possibilities where it's like, actually, I actually did lift that weight. And you're right. I didn't know how to land it. And you're right. I was afraid I was going to hit my head. And then, and now we can reason that through. But if the first stop is I can't, it seems like all reason stops. It's like, okay, fine, done. Moving on.
No, you're right. You can talk yourself into anything. Yeah, I mean, you can. It's amazing. I actually have one other part in the book called "Failure is the Only Option," and the idea is that exactly that. It's like, look, you're gonna fail if you want to go in a direction. You're gonna fail, and there's lots of different ways to fail. One way of failing is, how are you going to feel if you never did it, and you just went forward and you never did anything because you were always afraid you're going to fail. And then how are you going to feel at the end of your life? You're going to feel like you missed out and you failed. So there's a failure, and you don't want that one. And then you can do stuff, fail, and not learn from it and keep doing the same problem over and over, or you can do something, fail, and learn from it. But you can't avoid it. So if you can get it in your mind, that conversation that, yeah, if I'm going to learn something new, I'm going to fail. That's part of the process. And I'm going to learn from it because I'm going to be a smart person, because I can tell myself I'm really smart. Then you can go forward and you can be surprised at what you can do, right? I'm sure the girl who you were talking about, who became an Olympic athlete in 2 years, she didn't think day one she was going to be an Olympic athlete. She didn't think, oh, tomorrow I'm going to get accepted. She thought, okay, I got to do a bunch of stuff. I got to figure this out. There's work ahead.
She started with the idea that she could if she tried.
Yeah.
And so she did.
Yeah.
And that is the story, I think, of everybody that we look to. I know I'm making a generalization for the human population. For the people that we aspire to, the people who give the motivational quotes and then we keep on quoting, right? All of those, there's a universal characteristic to those folks, and certain things that they say. And one of those characteristics is, well, I just decided to. I just did it. And you're your worst enemy. And it's like, oh, so of the things we probably can say with surety, yes, you can do most of the things, or maybe even all the things that you dreamed you could, and you just got to do it. And all of the things that are holding you back will eventually move out of their way, or out of your way, because of your intent, your intention on that. And I get there are limitations to that. There's a guy who told me at one point in time, he's a trainer, he's like, you can do anything for 10 minutes. It's like, that's not true. There's lots of things you actually can't do for 10 minutes.
Right.
But, I was talking to my daughter about holding breath. And I said, what do you think the longest for holding, the record for holding your breath is underwater? And I've timed myself, and I maybe got up to like 45 seconds or a minute, and then I was like, oh, and we thought, it's probably like 8 minutes, 9 minutes, something like that. It's not. It's significantly longer than that. It's something like 20 minutes or something like that. And if you think about it, you're like, really? Seriously? You can do that? It's like, yeah, people do it. It's like, well,
there's a thing actually called, I think, static apnea, but they breathe oxygen beforehand. So they fill their body with, and David Blaine, actually, if you want a really cool TED Talk, David Blaine from New York, he did this thing where he held his breath underwater for 17 minutes, and he was on Oprah. And he tells the story of what was actually happening to it. If you want to watch a cool video, it's fascinating. And he talks about all the things that was happening in his head, all of them. Yeah, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack, and my heart rate was going up. And he walks you through his whole psychology of it. And yeah, he did 17 minutes and something on Oprah Live. It's phenomenal.
I did not see the interview, but I saw David Blaine. I followed some of his stuff in times past, and I heard that he had done that. It's fascinating the things that we actually can do when we, put our minds to it in simple phraseology. But very little is holding us back. Most of it is made up.
One of the really cool things, and you can look this up. There's a scientific study where they were checking how soon people would give up. So they have a method of saying, and I don't remember all the details of the study. They have a method of saying how far you can go, how far you can push yourself. And they found out people start giving up at like 40% of their maximum effort. Like that's where it starts. And it's like even top athletes give up at like 60% of what's possible. And there's reasons for that, right? Because if you go to 80% and you get too far, you can actually like have a heart attack and die. So your body wants to back you off before you get into a danger zone, but it backs you off way sooner.
Way sooner than you need to. And that's the stories. It goes. I think sometimes back to the stories that we tell ourselves in our minds, and the critic sometimes, and the little voice that pops up, that is there sometimes for our safety, and was necessary at one point in time, is no longer necessary. And I don't know. It's so super complicated and interesting. I know we're way over our time here.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, you're totally fine. It has been a great conversation, which is why we need to continue this. I love this. I'm going to pick up a copy of your book here. I'm assuming I'm going to go on a limb here and say I can pick it up on Amazon. True?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, there we go. Great. So the alignment quotient, for our viewers and listeners, I don't know Chris very well. We have known each other now for a little over an hour. And I do no research, zero, on the people who are on Coffee with Humans. And it's having coffee with a stranger who becomes a friend. And I count you among my friends, Chris. This is a fascinating conversation and a fascinating topic. So thanks for your journey that has brought you to now the north of France, enjoying beer and fries and mussels.
And thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking with you as well.
It's so good, man. Well, pick up Chris's book on Amazon, The Alignment Quotient, or head to thealignmentquotient.com. We will catch you next time on Coffee with Humans.
One of the things I love about Coffee with Humans are the raw conversations I get to have, meeting new people just like you. If you or someone you know should be on Coffee with Humans, go to coffeewithhumans.com. Remember, the only rule is no sales calls.
This has been Coffee with Humans. Subscribe to get updates or click to have coffee with me. coffeewithhumans.com.